At the back, a row of big cameras stood tall, their lenses pointing straight ahead. They were all focused on one person, Karoline Leavitt. She stood at the podium, calm and confident, just like she had done so many times before. She had faced tough crowds in the past, but today felt different. There was something in the air, something heavy and tense. It wasn't just another press conference. It was one of those days. The kind where one question could change everything. She adjusted the microphone and spoke. "Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started." Right away, hands shot up. Reporters, eager for a headline, waved their hands in the air, hoping to be chosen first. They wanted to be the one to break the big story, to ask the question that would make the evening news. Karoline scanned the room, her sharp eyes moving quickly. She pointed to a familiar face, a reporter from a major news network. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Leavitt, can you comment on the administration's latest tax policy?" Karoline nodded. "Of course," she said smoothly. She delivered her answer just the way she had practiced, clear, controlled, and confident. She knew exactly what to say and how to say it. Then another question came, this time about education. Again, Karoline answered without hesitation, staying composed. This was her job. Stand firm. Control the message. Stay on course. But then, a voice cut through the room. "Ms. Leavitt, let's talk about the real issue here." Karoline immediately recognized that voice. It belonged to her. The reporter who never backed down. The one who always asked the hardest questions. The one who never let things go. She was sitting near the front, leaning forward, her smirk barely hidden. Her pen tapped against her notepad, a quiet rhythm, steady and deliberate. She was waiting, watching, ready to pounce. Karoline didn't flinch. "Go ahead," she said, her tone steady. The reporter didn't waste a second. "Do you think the administration's policies are intentionally designed to suppress certain communities? Because the data suggests." Karoline lifted a hand, cutting her off. "I've answered that question before," she said smoothly. "The administration is focused on policies that benefit all Americans regardless of background. If you'd like to discuss today's topic, I'm happy to continue." The room shifted. Some reporters whispered. Others adjusted in their seats. The tension climbed little by little. But the reporter wasn't done. She leaned in even further. "You didn't actually answer the question, though," she said, her voice pressing like a blade. "Can you directly address?" Karoline didn't let her finish. "I did answer," she interrupted, firm but controlled. She turned slightly, scanning the room again, signaling that she was ready to move on. For a brief moment, it seemed like the situation might settle. Maybe things will go back to normal. Then, "I just don't see why you're avoiding it," the reporter said, pushing forward again. "It's a simple yes or no. Are these policies suppressing marginalized groups?" The temperature in the room changed. Other reporters exchanged looks. Some looked intrigued, others uncomfortable. Nobody liked a press conference turning into a showdown. But that was exactly what was happening. Karoline exhaled slowly. "I'm not avoiding anything," she said, her voice measured. "I'm staying on topic. If you have a question related to today's discussion, I'll gladly answer. If not, I'll be moving on." But the reporter didn't back down. She leaned even closer to the microphone. "So that's a no comment?" The energy in the room tightened. The moment felt heavier now, as if everyone in the room was bracing for what would come next. No one spoke. But the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. Like an elastic band stretched just before it snapped. Karoline placed both hands on the podium. She spoke slowly, her voice even and firm. "I've answered your question. I'll be moving on now." She pointed toward another journalist in the back, giving them a chance to speak. But before they could, the same voice cut in. "Why is it so hard for you to give a straight answer?" A flicker of irritation passed over Karoline's face. It wasn't much, just a brief tightening around the eyes, but it was enough for those paying attention to notice. She wasn't new to this. She knew reporters had a job to do. But there was a difference between pushing for accountability and turning a press conference into a personal stage. And right now it was clear which one this was. A few cameras panned from Karoline to the reporter, capturing every shift in body language, every subtle movement that could be spun into a headline. Karoline took a breath. "I don't believe in wasting anyone's time," she said. "If you have a new question, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'd like to give others a chance." The reporter smirked. "Sure. New question. Why is this administration so afraid of transparency?" A few quiet gasps. Some reporters scribbled furiously, sensing that something bigger was unfolding. Karoline blinked once, slow and measured. The only sign that the remark had landed. Her grip on the podium tightened for a second before she let go, exhaling just slightly. Then she smiled. But it wasn't her usual warm, diplomatic smile. It was different. A smile that said, "I see exactly what you're trying to do." She took her time before responding. "Transparency?" she repeated as if tasting the word. "That's exactly what this administration stands for. But what you're doing isn't about transparency. It's about theatrics." The words hung in the air. The reporter's smirk flickered, just for a second. A journalist in the back cleared his throat. "Karoline, if I could." But again the same voice interrupted. "So you're dismissing valid concerns as theatrics? The American people deserve real answers." The cameras caught everything. The slight tilt of Karoline's head. The way some reporters shifted in their seats. Some were annoyed that the event had been hijacked. A veteran journalist, someone who had been covering politics for decades, leaned back and muttered to a colleague, "This isn't journalism. This is performance art." But the reporter didn't care. She knew exactly what she was doing. The longer she kept this going, the more likely it was to go viral. A confrontation like this? It was gold for social media. Karoline saw it too. She had a choice. Engage and give the moment more fuel. Or shut it down entirely. She sighed and finally glanced toward security at the side of the room. She didn't have to say anything. The shift in her gaze was enough. The room tensed again. Everyone knew what that meant. This wasn't just a heated discussion anymore. It was about to escalate. The air in the room felt thick. No one spoke. But everyone was waiting. The reporter, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp eyes, didn't move. She was still leaning forward, pen resting against her notepad, a quiet smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. She wasn't here to ask a question. She was here to make a point. Karoline straightened. "I'll say this one more time," she said. "If you have a relevant question, I will answer it. But I will not stand here and engage in bad faith arguments." The reporter chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Bad faith?" she repeated, amusement flickering in her voice. Karoline didn't blink. She just watched. Karoline stood at the front of the room, looking out at the reporters sitting before her. Some were scribbling notes, others were holding cameras, and a few were just watching closely, waiting for something interesting to happen. One reporter, a woman with sharp eyes and a serious face, leaned forward in her seat. She tapped her pen on the table once and spoke. "I'm just doing my job." "Isn't that what the news is for?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but there was something in her tone, like she was daring Karoline to argue with her. Karoline didn't even blink. She had heard this kind of thing before. "The news is supposed to tell the truth," Karoline said firmly. "It's supposed to hold people responsible for their actions. But what you're doing isn't that. You're not asking real questions. You're trying to turn this into a big dramatic show." The room got quieter. A few reporters exchanged glances. They could feel it. This conversation was shifting. It wasn't just about the news anymore. It was about power. Who was in control here? The reporter tapped her pen again. "So, just to be clear," she said slowly, Karoline already knew what was coming. "Are you refusing to answer because you don't know the answer? Or because you don't want to say it?" A few reporters gasped. Some sat up straighter, sensing that this moment was about to get intense. Karoline took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not going to play this game," she said, keeping her voice calm but firm. "This press conference is not about you." The reporter smirked like she was pleased with herself. But then the smirk faded and she crossed her arms. "Oh, so asking for honesty is a game now?" she shot back. This time the whole room reacted. Some reporters whispered to each other. Others kept their eyes on Karoline, waiting to see what she would say next. Karoline had been in many tough conversations before. She had handled reporters who asked difficult questions. But this was different. This wasn't about real information. This was about control. It was about who could steer the conversation, who could make the other person look bad. She stepped back slightly, adjusting the microphone. "I think we're done here," she said. For a moment everything stopped. The reporter raised her eyebrows. "Excuse me?" Karoline didn't flinch. "You've made it clear you don't want a real discussion," she said. "You just want a big headline. If you'd like to stay and listen to the rest of the press conference, you can. But I won't be answering any more of your questions." The reporter let out a quiet laugh and shook her head. "Oh, so now you're silencing the news?" Karoline's jaw tightened. She had known the reporter would say that. She had known from the moment this started how this would look once the cameras turned off. She could already imagine the news headlines. Karoline Leavitt silences a reporter for asking tough questions. But she also knew that arguing wouldn't help. There was no winning against someone like this. She glanced at the security guard near the door. Just a small glance. That was all it took. The mood in the room changed. Reporters shifted in their seats. The air felt tense, almost electric. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was something much bigger now. The cameras started clicking even faster, capturing every second, every little movement. The reporter noticed Karoline looking at security. Her smirk disappeared. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice quieter but still sharp. Karoline didn't answer. The security guard stepped forward. He didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. The reporter had two choices. She could leave on her own, or she could stay and be removed. She hesitated. If security forced her to leave, it would be a huge story. But if she got up and walked out on her own, she could still spin the story her way. Slowly, she grabbed her notepad and stood. She adjusted the strap of her bag and muttered under her breath, "This is a disgrace." She spoke just loud enough for the microphones to pick it up. Then, as she turned toward the door, she threw out one last comment. "You can kick me out, but you can't hide the truth." Karoline didn't respond. The door closed behind the reporter. And just like that, it was over. Or at least it should have been. The room stayed silent. Reporters glanced at each other, unsure what to do next. Some kept writing in their notebooks, pretending not to notice. Others just stared at Karoline. Then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke up. "Karoline, do you think this was the right decision?" She turned her head and met the reporter's eyes. "I think it was necessary," she said simply. Another voice called out. "Do you think this will backfire?" Karoline knew it would. She knew that by the time she left this room, the video would already be spreading online. She could already see the headlines. But did it matter? She straightened her shoulders. "We're here to have discussions, not to be interrupted," she said. "If anyone else has real questions, I'm happy to answer them." Pause. Then, slowly, a hand went up. The press conference continued. But outside, the real storm had already begun. Within minutes, the video was everywhere. By the time Karoline stepped off the stage, her phone was already buzzing. At the edge of the room, her team was waiting. They whispered to each other, looking down at their phones with serious expressions. One of her aides hurried over, holding up her phone. "It's already trending," she said. "People are using the hashtag silencing the press." Karoline sighed. "Of course they are." The aide scrolled through more news articles. The big news stations are covering it. Some are just reporting what happened. But others... She hesitated, then showed Karoline the headlines. Karoline Leavitt shuts down press freedom. Reporter kicked out for speaking truth to power. Karoline stopped walking and looked at the words. She let out a small, tired laugh. "Speaking truth?" she repeated. She wasn't speaking truth. She was putting on a show. The aide nodded. "It doesn't matter. That's not how people are seeing it." Karoline had known this would happen the second she glanced at security. This was how things worked now. Clip the moment. Cut out the full story. Add a big, dramatic headline. Let the internet do the rest. Still, she wasn't going to panic. She had been in politics long enough to know things could change. "What about our supporters?" she asked, pushing open the door to her office. The aide followed her inside. "They're backing you. The conservative media says you handled it well. The usual people are defending you." Karoline nodded. "And the White House?" "They're staying quiet. They're not supporting you, but they're not against you either." That last part hung in the air. Karoline sat down at her desk, exhaling slowly. The press conference was over. But the battle had just begun. Karoline leaned on her desk, crossing her arms. Her helper didn't have to ask who she was talking about. Karoline looked at her phone again, her eyes moving fast over the screen. "She's really going for it," Karoline said. She did a live interview. "She's calling it a scary moment for the news," the aide said. Karoline looked up. "She's getting invited to talk on every big TV channel." Of course she was. Karoline tilted her head back, looking at the ceiling for a second. Then she pushed off the desk. "She wanted this," Karoline muttered. "And we just gave it to her." The aide bit her lip. "So what do we do now?" Karoline didn't answer right away. She walked to the window and looked down at the street. A crowd of reporters was already gathering outside. They were waiting to see what she would do next. She had a choice. She could stay quiet and let everyone talk about it however they wanted. Or she could step in and take control before people made up their minds. Her jaw tightened. This fight wasn't over. If anything, it was just getting started. Outside, the noise was growing. Reporters stood on the sidewalk, cameras pointing at the door, waiting for her to say something. Inside, Karoline stood still, her hands resting on her desk. Her aides kept scrolling through an endless list of news stories. "They're split," one aide finally said. "Some people say you did the right thing. They think you handled a rude reporter the way any press secretary should." She hesitated before adding, "Others, they're saying it was an attack on democracy." Karoline smirked and shook her head. "An attack on democracy?" she repeated. "For removing a reporter who wouldn't follow the rules?" The aide didn't answer. They both knew the truth didn't really matter. Not in a world where news spreads fast and people believe what they want. Another aide walked in holding his phone. She just posted her full statement. Karoline took a deep breath. "Let's hear it." The aide read from the screen. "Today I was removed from a press conference for doing my job, asking tough questions. This government says they care about honesty, but when they get real questions they kick out reporters. Every American should be worried about this." Karoline let out a short laugh. "And let me guess," she said. "She didn't mention how she interrupted the whole event?" The aide shook his head. "Nope. She's just acting like a victim." Karoline wasn't surprised. She had seen this game before. The way people twist stories, only showing parts that make them look good. Acting like they were being treated unfairly even when they weren't. Now Karoline had to decide what to do next. Her first thought was to fight back. She could hold a press meeting, explain exactly what happened, and remind people that removing a rude reporter isn't the same as silencing the news. But she knew what would happen if she did that. The more she talked, the more people would argue. The news cycle would keep going and going. She turned back to the window. A news van pulled up. Another reporter stepped out, holding a microphone. This wasn't going away. She tapped her fingers on the desk. "What's our best move?" she asked. The first aide hesitated. "We could post the full, unedited video before too many people believe her story. Let everyone see for themselves how many times you warned her before security stepped in." The second aide nodded. "That way it doesn't look like we're trying to argue. Just being honest." Karoline thought about it. It was a smart plan. Just show the facts. Let people watch what really happened. But she knew facts weren't always enough. People didn't just believe the truth. They believed whatever felt true to them. Her eyes flicked to her phone. Notifications kept popping up. She could already imagine what TV hosts would say, what people online would write. She took a deep breath, slowly let it out. Then she nodded. "Post the full video." Her aides moved fast. They wrote a statement. Got the video ready. Karoline watched them work, her mind already thinking ahead. The reporter wanted to make a big scene. But she didn't realize that Karoline wasn't just reacting. She was planning. The full, unedited video was posted within an hour. No fancy edits. No dramatic music. Just a simple post. "Watch for yourself," it said. The full exchange between Karoline Leavitt and the reporter at today's press conference. Karoline sat back in her chair, watching the numbers climb. Thousands of views in minutes. Comments poured in. Some people were mad. Others supported her. Her phone buzzed. A message from a friendly journalist. "Smart move. This takes the wind out of their sails." Karoline knew it wasn't that simple. The reporter was already on TV, telling her version of the story. Karoline clicked on one of the interviews. There she was, sitting in a dimly lit studio, eyebrows pulled together like she was really upset. "I was just doing my job," she told the news anchor. "I was asking important questions. Instead of answering, they kicked me out. That should worry everyone, no matter what side they're on." The anchor nodded seriously. "Did you feel scared?" Karoline rolled her eyes. "Scared?" The reporter let out a big, dramatic sigh. "Not in a physical way, no. But in my job? Absolutely. This is an attack on journalism." The interview switched to a group of experts, all talking about what had happened. "This is dangerous. A bad sign for free speech." She was just doing her job as a reporter. Karoline took a deep breath and turned off her phone. The truth was out there, but that didn't mean people would believe it. Her assistant peeked into the office. "You're gonna want to see this." Karoline followed her into the hallway, where a group of staff stood around a TV. A news channel was playing the video Karoline had shared. The host kept pausing it at different parts. "Look how she keeps interrupting," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't real journalism. This is just showing off." The panelists on the show nodded. "This was a setup," one of them said. She knew exactly what she was doing. She kept pushing until she got kicked out. Then she ran to the cameras and acted like a victim. The host turned to the camera. "Let's be clear. Karoline Leavitt didn't shut down the press. She stopped an activist pretending to be a journalist. Karoline crossed her arms, watching. It was obvious. One side of the country praised her for standing up for herself. The other side said she was trying to silence the press. Her assistant sighed. This is going to be a long week. Karoline nodded. Yeah, but at least the truth is out there. The real question was, who would believe it? 4 days the story wouldn't go away. It was everywhere, on TV, on social media, on talk shows. People argued about it nonstop. Each side twisted the story to fit their own opinion. Memes flooded the internet. Some made fun of the reporter. Others made Karoline look like a villain. But one thing was clear, the country was split. Karoline knew better than to expect everyone to agree. That's not how these things worked. But as she sat in her office watching another news panel, something caught her attention. A well-known journalist, one she actually respected, leaned forward in his chair. Let's be honest, he said. This wasn't a reporter looking for the truth. This was someone trying to go viral. And they got what they wanted. The other panelists looked uncomfortable. They weren't used to hearing this kind of honesty. She asked a question, got an answer, didn't like it, and kept pushing. Not to understand, but to start a fight. And when she got removed, she ran to the cameras and played the victim. That's not reporting. That's activism. The host frowned. So you think Karoline did the right thing? The journalist shrugged. I think we need to be honest about what journalism should be. Our job is to inform people, not to create drama. Karoline let out a slow breath. Finally, someone had said it. But she knew it wouldn't change anything. The headlines had already been written. The video clips had already been edited. The people who wanted to believe she was the bad guy wouldn't change their minds. And the people who supported her had already moved on, waiting for the next big argument. Her assistant knocked on the door. You have an interview request from? No, Karoline said immediately. The assistant blinked. You don't even know who it's from. I don't care, Karoline said, standing up. I'm not playing this game anymore. The truth is out there. Let them do what they want with it. The assistant hesitated, then nodded. Understood. Karoline picked up her phone, scrolling through the endless messages. The storm would pass. It always did. But she knew this wasn't just about one press conference. It was about something bigger. About how the media worked now. About how stories were shaped. About how the truth was becoming less important than getting attention. She looked at her assistant. Put out one last statement. What do you want it to say? Karoline thought for a moment. Then she smiled. Just 4 words. The assistant waited. Karoline nodded. Watch the full video. Because at the end of the day, that was all that mattered. The truth. Whether people wanted to see it or not. The news should be about facts. But in today's world, getting clicks and making people angry is more important. The real question isn't whether Karoline was right or wrong. The real question is, do we care enough about the truth to see when we're being tricked? If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.